Good evening, everybody. Welcome to 2A Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin reporting live from my bedroom because my son is using the living room. Thank you for joining. Grateful to everybody for making time for tonight's episode. A little bit of a different format. I'll run quickly through the news. There was a fair amount today. And then we'll bring in our guest, Mark Indries, and I'll chat with him for a little bit. And then your questions, if you're here on the 2A platform, please raise your electronic hand. As always, follow our ethos, peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace. If you're on X or YouTube and you're watching and you want to go in the chat, Mark has never had anything negative written about him on X. So please, let's not start tonight. He's used to just really kind comments. Um, as always, peace, love, and understanding. There's just no reason to put trash in the chat. It's gotten better, I hear. I never read it, but I hear it's gotten better. All right, what's going on? On the crash, the black boxes, which are orange, were recovered today. The investigation continues to proceed, but with the unusual circumstance of the President of the United States doing a running commentary on his view of the investigation. Helicopter flights have been suspended around Reagan Airport. I'm pleased with that. A, because I think it's crazy that they fly there so regularly, and B, because I'm flying to Washington myself on Sunday, and I'd rather not have to navigate that. The president today, again, he spoke at a photo op in the Oval Office, another rolling press conference. He said, once again, he highlighted that the helicopter was flying at an altitude that is not supposed to be there, suggesting through his tone and his framing that that seemed to be the major cause of the accident. But he also said that he thought there were other unspecified elements at play. We'll see what happens there. The military continues to not release the name of the third person on the helicopter, leading to this morning an extraordinary a series of things on X and elsewhere about the misidentification of the third person on the helicopter. But until we know who the third person is, internet and social media conspiracists can have a field day. On tariffs, the president said tonight that he would, in this press availability, that he will go forward with tariffs on Mexico and Canada and China. He said the oil tariff from Canada would be lower, probably 10%. These tariffs are on top of existing tariffs. I continue to tell people, and again, I get asked about this all day. The president is not interested in tariffs. He's interested in getting these countries to do what Colombia did, which is be threatened by tariffs and then do what he wants them to do. He was asked if there were some things that Canada and Mexico could do to avoid the tariffs being put on. And he said, no, there's really nothing. Obviously, there is. And I urge people, I don't care if tomorrow he puts on Truth Social, the tariffs are on. And I don't even really care if they go on because they could come off on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. Now, they may not. I'm not telling people there's no chance of tariffs. What I'm telling you is, and again, this seems so obvious, but when I say it to people, they act like it's revelatory. He's not interested in tariffs. He's interested in the American economy dominating, and he's interested in using the leverage the United States has through the threat of tariffs and tariffs, if necessary, to get his way. And in every case, it's pretty clear, I say pretty clear, somewhat clear what the United States wants. So I know it seems easy to write a headline that says Trump going forward with 25% tariffs, but I'll believe it when I see it, and I believe from what we can see, and particularly China is an odd case here, and I don't believe they want to have the fight with China till later this year, till Russia is resolved in Ukraine. Mexico and Canada, he can slap tariffs on them. We can be in a trade war, but the markets will go down and he won't like that, and it's not going to be good for the American consumer. So again, he can say all he wants to do them, he can do them, but I believe that these countries are going to find a way, as Colombia did, to de-escalate. More people fired in the federal government, more threats of firing, including in the FBI. Previously, prosecutors who worked on the cases against Donald Trump were removed or reassigned. Now they're talking about doing that with the FBI agents. Lots of points of view about this. One of the things that Donald Trump, he's talked about it a million times, so this isn't some inside knowledge of mine. He looked at the texts that were released and subpoenaed from the FBI agents who investigated him, and he saw what he thought was pretty clear bias. And so, from a human point of view and a deep state point of view, I can see why he might want to remove some people. People who don't like Donald Trump are saying this is a deviation from norms, and it is. And they say that it represents tyranny and all those things. I can argue it either way, but I continue to believe case by case. Let's see who the actual people are. He won, and his side of the country believes that Washington is dominated and these bureaucracies The FBI less so than most places, but even the FBI, it's dominated by people who don't like him and people who have moved over the last 10 years to try to keep him from winning, destroy him, or send him to prison. So we'll continue to watch and see how this plays out. But I'll say again, if you're someone who's outraged by this, I understand your outrage. I truly do. But I'd encourage you to think about it from the other side of America, where they're either not outraged by this or they support it because they've seen some systemic bias in the deep state and the bureaucracy for a long time. Government computers, some of them at least, are going to be shut down this evening. I believe maybe some of them have shut down while they rework things. Again, we're seeing a revolutionary change. This is not Ronald Reagan's revolution. This is a real one. Okay, that's some of the news. I left a few things out. Maybe some more topics will come up. But I want to spend a bulk of the episode talking to our guest. Very pleased to have him here. Mark Andreessen has been a successful business person and an understander of startups and technology. I chose the wrong Mark Andreessen. Look at that, because I got a couple here. But what he has been of late is one of the finest podcast and interview guests around. All right, let's see what's happening here. Needs to turn on his camera, please. I look at him as a great anthropologist and a great sociologist. I think his understanding of not just the culture of Silicon Valley, which he understands incredibly well, or business, but understanding wider American culture. I've listened to a lot of and read a lot of the interviews he's done in the last few months, and I find them extraordinarily insightful in a way that not many people can be about what's happening in America. So I welcome in the modern day de Tocqueville, Mark Andreessen, because Wisconsin's a lot like France, right? Stranger in a strange land.
if you say so.
Yeah. Thank you for making time. Very, very grateful to you. And again, I've loved the interviews I've listened to you with. There you go.
Oh wait, Paris.
There you go.
There we
Paris,
go.
and I love the purple couch.
I'm going with it.
My policy is to try to ask only questions you've never been asked. That's my aspiration, because it's boring for you to answer the same questions over and over again, and people have heard your answer. So each time, if you want to say never been asked it or been asked it, you feel free to do it. Otherwise, we'll just see from your tone. And again, very grateful to you for making time. If you want to get in on the conversation, please raise your hand. The press and the Democrats cast the participation in the transition and now in the government by, I'll call them your colleagues, very successful business people, many from San Francisco Bay Area, as they're there because they're power hungry, or they're there because they want to help their business. They're looking to either their industry, lower regulation, less taxes, or their own personal businesses. Like Musk is there to be soft on China because he wants to do business with China. I tend to ascribe more positive motives to people. What's your sense of why they want to be there? You've done this too. You've given up time for your day job to spend time helping the Trump administration. Maybe not every motive's the same, but in general, how would you describe the motives of the people doing it?
Yeah. So first, thanks. It's great to be here. Long time listener, first time caller. So start by saying, look, I'm not, I play no formal role, and just disclaimer up front, which is I don't, I can't speak for the administration on anything, and I don't have any formal role. I've described myself as an unpaid intern, which is probably just itself a stretch. But I'm trying to help as much as I can, from the outside. Yeah, look, it's a whole bunch of people. I mean, it's actually a fairly large number of people now from my world who are involved. Some of them have gone into formal positions. Quite a number of people I know are now in, getting appointed, including to pretty senior positions. And so there's that cohort, and then there's the Doge cohort with Elon and his crew. And they've described that, and it's a somewhat different arrangement because again, like Elon doesn't have a formal position. And then I would just say there are a large number of volunteers. And so there are a large number of people showing up and trying to scrub in. I think everybody's a human being. I think different people have different emphasis on what they want to do. I guess maybe the most interesting thing would just say, I think things have really changed in the last decade, and especially in the last 5 years. And that's certainly true for the whole country, but it's really true for tech, and it's really true for tech's involvement in politics. And, maybe the best way to put it would just be, tech and Silicon Valley operated basically in a bubble in Northern California for, 50 years, being really not that relevant to the political process. And politicians only ever really having a benign view of us. I mean, when I was a kid, coming up in the 90s, Clinton and Gore and the Democrats, and by the way, Republicans at that point were super pro tech, super pro Silicon Valley. They thought all this stuff was super nifty. They thought it was great for America, and nobody really ever had a problem with it. And it's really only in the last decade that the government has, in its various arms and adjuncts, have really come to bear down hard and get very involved in Silicon Valley. And so if there's a through line for a lot of the people who are showing up, I think it's that, they or we have been exposed to the political process in a new way in the last decade. And, I'm an example of somebody who just concluded from that it just isn't going to work to stay out of it. We tried that, and it just doesn't make sense to not be involved. And so that's probably the single biggest motivator. I'm very focused on tech issues. Other folks have obviously weighed in on a lot more of the other, foreign policy and other issues that I'm not involved in. So there again, probably different motivations.
Your role has been reported has mostly been helping with personnel, sort of locating, matchmaking people who might be interested. Is that basically what you've done, or have you done more than that?
Yeah. So
As a
volunteering. Yeah. So basically volunteering
as a volunteer.
as a volunteer. Yeah. So volunteering and basically on sourcing. And so, helping to kind of find people who want to go in. And then also for a while, I was on the interview team, in Florida, as a volunteer with a bunch of, with a bunch of people, both from tech and outside tech, just kind of helping vet through the candidates.
And again, to dissect your first answer a little bit, is it that your industry needs to be involved because government policy is hurting your industry, or is it more broadly America needs your involvement because the things they're doing to affect your industry will have an adverse effect on the whole country?
Well, we think both, and of course, look, it's hard to separate out self-interest or deny self-interest, and I'm not a monk, and so I won't claim that. Having said that, I do believe very strongly, and it's a position that used to not be considered radical, and maybe now it is. I do believe that America being technologically strong, was really key to the success of the country in the 20th century, right? Because technological strength maps directly to economic strength. Right. The country that is strongest in technology is going to have the fastest economic growth, the fastest productivity growth, the fastest employment growth, the most tax revenue, to be able to pay for everything. And then military strength. The country that's strongest on technology and strongest on the economy is also going to be the strongest militarily. And the 20th century was the American century, I think, in large part because America over that period had the best technology, the best economy, and the best military. And there's a peacetime version of that, which is just prosperity and safety, and then there's a wartime version of it, which is World War II and then the Cold War, where we won both of those wars. One of them a shooting war, and one of them fortunately not, but we won those. And the end of the Cold War was because Russia fundamentally, economically, technologically, militarily could not keep up. We were able miraculously to end the Cold War without direct bloodshed. And so I just think, like, if you're thinking about America being strong and successful and prosperous, and the world therefore being safer and a better place for everybody, I think we have a track record, generally speaking, that you want a strong America. I don't know how you're going to have a strong America if you don't have a strong tech sector. Like I said, like Democrats used to just take this, Clinton and Gore would agree with everything I said, everything I just said. I think first term Obama would have agreed with everything I just said. And so a lot of us out here are a little bit still kind of blinking in amazement that any of this is controversial because it just seemed like it was so obvious for so long. Having said that, I also often refer to us out here as the dog that caught the bus, and we have the tailpipe between our teeth and we're being dragged down the street, which is, tech worked, the internet worked, it became a big deal. Obviously, the internet became central to our politics. The argument I make out here is like, look, this is never going to change. We are now always going to be enmeshed in politics because what we do just has turned out to be too important and too central to the political process itself, as well as many other issues in the country. And so, maybe the other side of this is just people like me and us learning to, basically to grow up and have a more adult view of this. Of course, you guys were not going to get to sit out in California forever and just do your own thing. Of course, you were going to have to come into the fold to be part of this, kind of broader conversation. So I also concede that point.
And not just write checks to Al Gore and Barack Obama.
Yes.
I don't want you to peace, love, and understanding. I'm not asking you to be unduly critical, but you're such a keen observer of this. And in your previous interviews, you've talked about the kind of eye-opening posture of the Biden administration towards regulation, towards innovation, towards government control. How should history understand that the administration had a vice president from Northern California who's been around the tech world forever, and that play apparently did not ameliorate the problem? How do you understand that?
So start by saying the sort of anti-tech sentiment or animus, and by the way, there's some anti-tech sentiment on both sides, right? So it's not like there's a pure,
Yeah.
pure thing here. But the anti-tech animus on the Democratic side, I think in retrospect, started in 2013, around 2012, 2013. It was sort of after the Obama reelection, where, by the way, they were super positive about tech through the election, and there were magazine cover stories about how social media was wonderful because it got Obama reelected. But really, the sort of left-wing anti-tech energy started to form up 2013, 2014. We started feeling it in our companies back then. You started seeing it in the press. And then, obviously the Trump nomination election catalyzed it, and, everything blew sky high with the Cambridge Analytica scandal and everything that followed. And then there was this sort of strange first Trump term from our standpoint, which is, he was kind of in charge of the government, but also a lot of arms of the government were becoming much more radicalized against tech during that period, and kind of doing things that in retrospect he probably wouldn't agree with. And then to your question, like basically the Biden administration just turned out to be just much more radical than we were expecting. And, honestly, the first year and a half or 2 years, the Biden sort of term were very strange for us because just the world had gotten bizarre because of COVID and, every other crazy thing that was happening. But, but also the Biden administration just started coming at us in a much more, I would say, direct and brutal assault, meaning like coming at our companies and coming at our industry and, really trying hard to, destroy entire sectors of tech and destroy entire sort of swaths of, of what we consider to be kind of startup land. And really coming hard after our companies, coming after our founders. I've talked elsewhere about, the debanking phenomenon, started hitting really hard. We started having lots of founders and companies literally kicked out of the banking system. And so, the first like 2 years of that were disorienting because it was just so different than what we were used to. And it took us a while, our initial inclination was just keep our head down, hope it passes. And then it didn't pass. And then it was sort of, in our view, as our response to that was, we have to go get involved in that. And then, for the last 2 years, it was more of a fight, because we were actually in there kind of punching back, but, frankly, it wasn't going that well. Vice President Harris.
Yeah, go ahead. Well,
No, please.
just during those 4 years, did anyone in any discussion ever say, "Hey, let's call the vice president. She's from Northern California. A lot of us have given her money. A lot. She's talked favorably about the tech sector and its importance to California and the world." Did anyone ever say that? Let's do that.
So Vice President Harris is somebody we've known for a long time. I know her. I've known her probably since 2010. My wife knows her very well. My partner Ben has had her at his house many times. His wife Felicia, my partner Ben's wife Felicia, sat next to a vice president at church for many years in San Francisco. I guess, yeah, and yes, there were some conversations and so forth. Obviously, nothing, ultimately nothing productive. I would say we do have this like fairly bizarre phenomenon where, like our politicians in California also hate us, and so as you know,
Well, not all of them. Not all of them.
It's pretty hard to find. Like our own hometown Congress people don't like us. Like our governor doesn't like us.
Congressman Khanna likes you.
Congressman Khanna likes us sometimes.
Okay.
He likes us. He likes us now. There was a long time when he didn't. I supported. So he's a good example. I supported Roe. So I supported Roe in his initial race, and it was. And this was when I was doing much smaller scale. But Roe's like, yeah, I'm a young guy, and I'm I understand tech, and I'm going to take out this incumbent, and it's be much better. And he said like, yeah, I'm going to be very pro business and so forth. And then, and he went in, and then he turns right around. He's the co-chair of Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. So,
Bernie
retrospect,
Bernie likes the internet.
Bernie doesn't like us. And so, look, and Roe has to do what Roe has to do, but, he decided that he had to kind of orient against us. And so my read is like the vice president also had to do that, which is just as the Democratic Party became, whatever you want to call it, more radicalized, more extreme, more emphatic, let's say on business issues, corporate issues, tech issues, internet issues, as sort of the censorship, program, the social media issues ramped up, and as they became anti-crypto, anti-Facebook, and then as they really started engaging hard on AI policy, they, just kind of, this. I mean, like Bernie almost won. Bernie arguably won the 2016 nomination. Like that. That's a different Democratic Party than the Clinton Gore party. Yeah. And so my view is just like the vice president and others, including, by the way, Biden himself, kind of got wrapped up in this more radicalized thing. And by the time they realized the consequences of it, it was too late.
let me ask you one more question about her. And again, I know you're not speaking for her and you're not, but you're a great reporter. And as you listed, you know a ton of people who know her really well, right?
Yep.
She obviously, if you said to her in an interview, how important is the tech, is America's high tech? She'd say, oh my goodness, it's one of the crown jewels of the country of California. I'm pretty sure she'd say that. She wouldn't say, she might have some problems with, Facebook 2016, whatever. But do you think that she in her actual position is you guys need to be highly regulated and you're evil? Or do you think her position is you're great, but the party's moved so far to the left, I have to take that position?
Would it shock you if I said that I'm not sure she has actual positions?
It would not. So
Um,
your view is she just said it because that's where the party was.
yeah, she was the law and order prosecutor she was a hardcore law and order prosecutor as district attorney and then as attorney general. And then, she became very, pro, pro open the prisons as
Yeah.
vice president. So, and look, the party changed. I don't blame these people that, they had you adapt to the times, but, she changed her positions on a lot of things. By the way, she then changed her positions a lot between, famously 2019 and 2024.
Yeah.
I would just say, look, her administration was just very brutal. Like they just came at us hammer and tong, trying to cause us as much damage as they could. We reached out to her during what people out here call the hot swap. So the swap in of Biden for Harris, and we reached out and we just said, look, we're not asking for we're not you can't we're not asking for favors or guarantees or anything, but is there going to be if there's a Harris term, is it going to be Biden term V2 and the same attitudes are going to persist, or you know us really well, California really well. Is there going to be an opportunity for to kind of maybe bring things back together again? And the response, not directly from her, but from people close to her, was we are not going to engage on policy issues until after she's elected.
Would you welcome her being governor of California?
It depends. Yeah, my sense is the Democrat. You've been covering this a lot. The Democrats are going through a dark night of the soul, trying to figure out what they're going to be coming out the other side of this. I haven't talked to her. I would imagine if she's going to run for governor, she has to go through a similar process, and she has to decide what the new
Yeah.
world looks like. I would love nothing more. I mean, look, if we could have a moderate Democratic governor in California who's pro the California's the fifth largest economy in the world, right? There's two giant industries that generate most of the tax revenue. It's tech and Hollywood. It would be fantastic to have a Democratic governor of California who loved one of the two big industries. We
Yeah.
haven't had that. We certainly haven't had that under the current one.
Do you see someone like that who might run?
I don't know.
No.
I think it's too early.
Okay. You mentioned debanking. And in my experience, there's two kinds of people who we know and in the country at large. People who know exactly what you mean by that, and people who have no idea. So give an example or just explain it more vividly. And it's to people who don't know about it, when I've tried to explain to them, they're incredulous. They say, JP Morgan Chase is going to tell some successful business person they can't bank at JP Morgan Chase? Like, why would they turn down their business? So
Yeah.
explain to people, because I'm sure the people on here, they may not even know the term. Explain just how, not just how bad it is for someone who happens to, but how insidious it is for what it says about the wider society, Mr. de Tocqueville.
Yes. So as you know, banking is not an unregulated industry. It's tightly regulated by the government and by the government bureaucracies. There's at least 8 federal agencies that regulate the banks. By the way, if you're a bank CEO, you complain about this endlessly because who can figure out even what to do when you've got 8 regulators, but there's 8 regulators that regulate the banks. In the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, there was legislation, passed called Dodd-Frank that greatly increased the level of regulation and what I would describe as sort of intertwining of the government and the banks. By the way, part of that is that new bank creation in the U.S. went to zero after Dodd-Frank, and so you no longer have new entrants in the banking system, and then banks fail and consolidate all the time, and so the number of banks in the country is shrinking rapidly. And then you've got this concept of the too big to fail banks. The technical term is called the GSIBs, the sort of, I think it's globally significant something, but banks, but they're under very special kinds of regulation. And so they're very intertwined with the government and with the government bureaucracy and with the officials in the Treasury Department and all these other agencies. That gives the government potentially a great deal of power to use the banks as an extension of its own power, of state power. And we first saw this debanking phenomenon actually start 15 years ago under Obama with a operation, something that was literally called Operation Choke Point at the time. which was, I think, led by the Treasury Department at the time, which was to use the banking system to essentially, I would say, influence or coerce economic activity that may not be technically illegal, but which is unwanted in the American economy. And it actually started with medical marijuana. Right. And so it was like, okay, these states are legalizing pot, but like we don't want pot to exist as a thing. So we're going to debank all the medical marijuana dispensaries, force them to operate in cash. It then extended to prostitution, right? Which sounds like it's a good idea to like not have prostitution be something that runs through the banks. Of course, the problem is you're then forcing prostitutes to operate entirely in cash, which has other consequences. It then went to gun dealers, right? And so people in the government who did not, let's say, were not enthusiastically pro Second Amendment, started to advocate for and implement the debanking of gun dealers. And so it basically started to run. And there was a scandal about this in Washington in the, 13, 14, 15 period where people kind of figured it out, and there was kind of a blow up and some of that stopped. And then basically that program reactivated under what we call Operation Choke Point 2.0, which was the same thing. And it reactivated hard basically started in Trump's term in some of the bureaucracies, but it really, came in hard in the Biden-Harris administration. And it became extremely focused specifically on crypto. And so for the last 5 years, anybody who's associated with crypto, anybody who has crypto in their job title, anybody who runs a crypto company is just like their odds of being able to get a bank account are very low. It also applies to companies. And so we have on the order of 30 companies that got debanked, right? And debanked means you don't get a bank account, right?
When you say we've got 30 companies, do you mean 30 companies you invest in?
Yeah, 30 portfolio companies at our venture firm. And so I'll just give you the experience of what it means to be debanked. So what it means to be debanked is you get a letter from your bank saying, we now decline to be your bank. You have to close your account by the end of the month. You then ask them why you're being debanked, and they respond, we can't tell you. There is a law called the Bank Secrecy Act that prevents us from telling you. Good day, sir. Right. And then what happens
is it like Willy Wonka where they say, I said good day?
Yes. Do not let the door hit you on the butt.
Let me just stop you on that portion. So these are companies with a fair number of assets, right? These are not people with $1,000 checking accounts. They have relationships with their private bankers in these large banks. Their lawyers sometimes are dealing with stuff. Just on an interpersonal basis, it just seems strange. Say you must close your account. Like did people your portfolio companies, did they appeal? Did you call Jamie Dimon and say, Jamie, stop debanking us?
Yes. Oh, yes. We had this conversation many times, including with CEOs.
And what did the CEOs say? My hands are tied. The government's making me.
They said under the Bank Secrecy Act, we can't tell you why we're doing what we're doing.
And did anybody go to court over it?
There have been challenges, but you're in this zone. There have been challenges, but you're in this zone where in theory, what you're dealing with is a private actor, right? And so there's no law that says that a bank has to take a client, right? And this is not like a case of racial discrimination, so like civil rights law doesn't apply. So the bank is acting as a private entity, except of course is the bank acting as a private entity because what is happening, right? But you can't necessarily prove is that it's pressure from the government.
So they say you must close down your account, so you take your money, and then you start dialing around, and you start going down to banks you've never heard of, right?
Yes, and you find out that you can't get accounts at those banks either. Right. And so and then you're in real trouble. And by the way, debanking is kind of the shorthand, but it's like bank accounts and then its ability to like transact credit card transactions. You can get kicked out of the credit. There's an analogous thing that happens in the credit card system. There's credit card blacklists where you get kicked out. You can't have a business that processes credit cards or debit cards. There's also, you can get blocked out of being able to get home insurance. You can get blocked out of being able to get car insurance. You can get blocked out of being able to get mortgages. And so so what it is it's the domestic equivalent of the foreign sanctions regime that we use on hostile regimes like Iran and North Korea. Except it's not a formal action by the U.S. government. It's an implicit activity that's happening through some combination of federal pressure and bank voluntary choice, deliberately obscured behind the cloak of this Bank Secrecy Act. Let me just continue those. Who's getting debanked?
Please do.
It's the crypto companies. It's what we call the fintech companies. So it's the financial services startups that are not themselves crypto companies, but they they want to offer new kinds of financial services, and so there's a similar kind of pressure there. And then there's something like extremely dangerous and damaging, which is, of course, political debanking. And this has become a hot topic, recently, because you probably saw, the president was on this video thing into Davos, and the CEO of Bank of America, And Trump said on the call, he said, by the way, you're debanking conservatives. You need to stop doing that. The Bank of America put out a statement saying we would never debank a conservative. I've heard the same thing from other bank CEOs. If you talk to people who were in the first Trump administration, a very common story that you hear is the officials from the first Trump administration got debanked after 2021. They just got like
Correct.
flat out like blitzed
Correct.
out. A number of them actually ended up at a very small bank where they all hope that nobody points out who the bank is because it's like the last bank in America that they can get banked at.
Yep.
And then the kicker to the whole thing was, I'll just give you the two kickers we discovered in the last few weeks. So one is Melania Trump published her book, and she doesn't talk in public much. But she says in the book that she and Barron both got debanked after Trump left office, right? And so like I guess it's possible that like Melania and 16-year-old Barron were like involved in some global crime conspiracy. I don't think that's actually the case. I think they were just happened to be family members. And then the other thing that just came out this week that actually shocked me, which is there's a guy named Roloff Botha. Who is the head of one of the top Silicon Valley venture capital firms, one of our peer firms called Sequoia. And this guy is a pillar of the American, he's a great immigrant success story, incredibly successful entrepreneur, and then head of Sequoia, incredibly successful guy, blue chip in every possible respect. And he just gave an interview like literally 3 days ago where he said, oh, by the way, he said he got debanked in 2019 for reasons that were never explained to him, by the way, by Bank of America.
Yeah.
And so this thing has been ripping for years. There's like, and this accompanies this like intense assault by these same government agencies trying to, come after these industries like crypto and fintech. And so obviously what's happening here is an intertwining of state power and private entities, like it's illegal for the government. It's illegal for the government. It's unconstitutional for the government to take something that it itself cannot do and then to, coerce or require or strong arm a private entity into doing that thing. And of course, that's exactly what's been happening here. So the bureaucracies in the government built a financial Death Star to be aimed at their domestic enemies, and it ran unchallenged basically until this handover. And then maybe where we are today is both the House and the Senate, with the turnover of everything. There are hearings coming up where this is going to be fully kind of undressed in Congress.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what happens.
People get debanked who are indicted, never convicted, but just indicted. That happens to individuals. What happened to your 30 portfolio companies that were debanked? Did they wilt? Did any of them go out of business because they were debanked?
Oh yeah. Some of them die. Some of them just can't operate, right? So they're just done, and the founders, close it down and go do something else. Some of them pivot, as we say, which is, they change their business plan to try to come up with something that will evade the Death Star. Some of them go figure out some plan B. They figure out a way to operate internationally, for example. So they could have some international bank that does it. Others, figure out some maneuver.
Right.
There were small. Part of what happened during the SVB crisis, for a while there were some sort of banks that were refusing basically the pressure from the government, and with names like Silvergate and I forget the name of the other one, but so they were banking these companies, and then those banks went down during the when Silicon Valley Bank went down, and there's like at least lots of smoke that those banks got targeted by the feds because they weren't cooperating with the debanking regime. So
this story is interesting. It's important, and it represents, as you've suggested correctly, a huge abuse of government power. Do you remember reading a lot of stories about this in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal?
No.
No, because if they were debanking liberals, there would be. It's an extraordinary, great story, and again, it's just not covered because it doesn't fit with their view of the world. It's a really a big problem, and thank you for explaining it. And you, as you point out, the president brought it up at Davos, but you've been bringing it up in all your interviews, and I really appreciate it because you're speaking truth to power, and maybe the Wall Street Journal will hear this and write a story. All right, bring folks in for questions as always. Tell us where you are, what's on your mind. Christine, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Mark. I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, ma'am.
I am in the great state of Maryland. Really happy to be here, Mark with a C. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I'm really interested in your thoughts on federal government funding for companies going forward. And for people in the community who don't know, most of the billions of dollars spent by the federal government to support small business research, as well as the scaling of companies that have created meaningful technologies, is non-dilutive grant funding. And there are rumors that the Trump administration might require that the US government receive an equity stake for funding going forward. So I'm just curious on your thoughts about this potential adjustment, or if there are other ways you think that federal government funding programs should be tweaked so we can continue to really promote public-private sector collaboration and the growth of research and development, in the United States.
Yeah, so I should start by saying I don't actually know what's happening with that issue, so I can't speak to it directly. I guess I'd offer a couple of things. So one is I would just say personally in my world, the kinds of companies that we work with, they primarily don't get government grants, and so I'm not active at all in like trying to help our companies get government grants, and we basically never do that. By the way, also I'm actually opposed to the idea. There's this thing called the R&D tax credit, which is a similar kind of thing, which is the idea that the government should sort of subsidize, should give tax credits to companies for R&D. I actually am not that big of a fan of the R&D tax credit because our companies don't pay taxes for the first decade because they don't make money for the first decade, and so the tax credit ends up actually being a subsidy to big companies, I believe, at the expense of small companies and taxpayers. But maybe that's a separate issue. What I will say is, I think in my world, the thing that really matters is obviously upstream science funding, and so not funding to our companies, but upstream into the university system, into the scientific complex, scientific research. And at least, for most of my career, it was kind of generally understood that, of course, you want to have a separation between, call it like research, which is what the universities do, and maybe the national labs, which is like long lead scientific development with unclear, potential application. And then you want to have a development side, which is more the private sector, which is venture capital and startups. When you have a science that works, there's some handoff mechanism to the private sector, and then we build companies based on it. And so at least my idealized model of the world is the government pays for basic research to the benefit of all taxpayers in the entire country, and then the companies commercialize in appropriate ways that technology with primarily private capital. Having said all that, I'd add one more maybe thing that makes it more complex, which is I'm sure you're aware, many other countries outside the U.S. and actually outside of Western Europe now have these so-called sovereign wealth funds, and so they have these large pools of capital that have the ability to make equity investments, and in some cases very large-scale equity investments. And those sovereign pools have become very large investors. We have a number of them as investors in our funds. They become major venture capital funders. They become direct investors in a lot of companies, as well as, by the way, they fund everything from they fund huge real estate projects and all kinds of things in their countries. And in those countries, the government actually can be an equity participant in capitalist activity happening in their country. And we just, to your question, we just in the U.S. don't have a tradition of that. We haven't had a mechanism for that. And so hypothetically, you could imagine an American sovereign wealth fund that takes equity stakes, and maybe the kind of thing you're talking about is how that starts. But I don't know if that's what's happening.
Do you think that would be beneficial for companies looking to?
It's good news, bad news. Countries have interests, and so they if they can fund things by giving loans but not making equity investments, maybe they should be able to make equity investments. And then, to the extent it increases funding into desirable areas, I think that would be good. The question always is, do you then corrupt the investment process with the political process? And, does it end up being, used as a instrument of political influence? What kind of terms and conditions are put on things? How are the decisions made for who gets the grants? And does that become a political process? And so I think I think there's very kind of potent arguments on both sides of that.
Awesome.
Christine,
Thanks so much.
thank you. Appreciate it. All right, David Burrell, our polling partner here, and WIC in Georgia. David, welcome in. Question for Mark.
Thank you, Mark. I think I have two questions that's hopefully interesting to the whole two-way community here. But looking forward to we haven't talked about AI yet much today, and when we think about the implication it may have on upcoming elections, I would love for you to kind of explain to everyone here what AI agents are. And then I'm going to put a hypothetical out there for you. Let's imagine that it's 2017 and either the left or the right, as an enterprise, which is more of like a loose confederacy, but they are able to get their data ready and operationalize AI agents. What type of impact would that have? Or what type of competitive advantage would that have for one side or the other if they were able to do that? And, I mean, obviously, who knows what will happen in the elections, but can you just kind of talk to, how big of an advantage that'll be if someone operationalizes these AI agents for the elections?
Yeah, so I would say, this is the AI is real and that's happening. The agent part of it is not yet really happening. And so it's more of a hypothetical question.
Mark, explain what those are, please.
Yeah, so AI, AI's been in the news a lot. So obviously AI is ChatGPT and systems like that. And then there's this new generation of AI that are called reasoners, and this is the DeepSeek thing that's been in the news for the last 2 weeks. And so reasoners are like this. So ChatGPT is what's called a large language model. It has this marvelous property where it talks to you in English, answers your questions, and then it has this incredible ability to both be creative. So it can like compose new Shakespearean sonnets, but it also has the disconcerting property that if it doesn't know the answer to something, it makes it up. And so we have kind of creative computers for the first time. And then the big advance in the last few months, starting with something out of OpenAI called O1, and then something out of DeepSeek called R1. These are what are called reasoners. And so this is the next stage of AI, which is AIs that actually reason, meaning AIs that actually solve problems in a step-by-step way such that you can trust the solution. And AIs are starting to be able to reason very well in AIs reason well in domains in which there's a verifiably correct answer. And so that includes code and math, which is the thing that's happening right now. But you could also think about, areas of science like physics, biology, chemistry, where you have AIs reasoning and designing new, drug compounds and so forth. And then also law and medicine. So professional fields in which you could have a world-class expert who could say, yeah, that's the correct answer, to a diagnostic question. Then the AI gets really good at diagnosing that disease. And so we in our industry, we feel like basically the AI revolution is underway, and now specifically the reasoning revolution is underway. And people at home watching this, if you get a professional subscription, which is pretty cheap to OpenAI, and you use their O1 model, or you go online and use the DeepSeek R1 model, you can actually experiment with this today, and you can talk to a reasoning AI and have it solve problems for you. And so in our world, this is like a giant earthquake. This is tremendously exciting. We're investing very aggressively behind all this. We think that the consequences of this are going to be, profound. And by the way, on net, at least extremely positive. And so it's all very exciting. Having said that, these systems are sort of Q&A systems today, right? So it's like chatbots. You ask a question, it answers the question. If you don't ask another question, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there and waits for somebody else to ask it a question. The idea of agents is basically take that AI idea and basically create sort of bots, right? Create like software, basically robots that are powered by AI that you then give a goal to, and then they go out and they try to accomplish the goal. And the goal might be go research a project for me, or go write code for me, right? Or by the way, go run a small business for me, right? Or anything that you might want to, anything you might want to have an employee do, or hire a company to do. In theory, you'll have an AI agent that will go out and do that. There's a lot of very smart technologists working on this. We'll see what happens. AI in the political process, the concern I think most people have is is basically propaganda. Sort of AI as a form of sort of weaponized propaganda. And there's the video version of that, which is deep fakes. And then there's the text version of that, which is social media posts. And if you get into some big pitched argument on X over some political topic, and a lot of people end up following it, and it influences their vote, and you were debating with an AI the whole time, is that proper or improper? I think the concern is real. I think we went through a version of that concern, obviously, with social media and the Cambridge Analytica, kind of scandal in the 2016, 2017 period, where a lot of people became convinced that a version of that had actually happened with kind of these Russian troll farms doing like fake social media content and tilting the American election. I can tell you, I've seen tremendous amounts of information on that, and and have had a lot of exposure to that. Good news, bad news, depending on where you sit. Like that didn't happen, and so the Cambridge Analytica thing was like extremely overblown, and almost entirely, as it turns out, fake in retrospect. It didn't actually happen. But look, there are people are concerned that actually something like that could actually happen now with AI bots running around. And I think that's going to be part of the AI discussion that's going to happen, in the next 5 or 10 years, because it's like, even if you're concerned about that, what exactly are you willing to do about it? What levels of restrictions are you really willing to put on it? Like what laws would ever be passed to be able to deal with that? And so it's something that we'll all, I think, have to be discussing and trying to figure out.
Have you talked about the Cambridge? Just let me clarify, David. Quick. Have you talked about the Cambridge Analytica thing in public before?
Not really. I mean, I sort of answer it kind of the way I just
Yeah.
answered it, but not in detail.
But can you paragraph on what was fake about the narrative?
Yeah, so what was real, there was a real, it's with a lot of these things, right? What was real, there was a very small kernel of truth. And the kernel of truth was that there was this thing in Russia called the Internet Research Agency, which was basically a troll farm. And that existed, and it was owned by one of the oligarchs, and they did various rogue, guerrilla marketing things and whatever for companies. And then they did some stuff for the Russian, they did like propaganda stuff for the Russian government in various countries. And they basically had a very, in retrospect, what we now know is a very small scale operation to basically, I would describe it as sort of screw around in the 2016 election. And so they bought like $150,000 worth of ads on Facebook, 150,000, right? Not million, but thousand. And then they had a little operation with a bunch of rogue troll bots that were kind of running around, kind of talking to people on Facebook. So there was like this tiny little kernel of truth to it. And then there was this other thing. There was this operation called Cambridge Analytica in the UK, which was unrelated, but it was basically this entity that was set up around this weird company in the UK that started out as like some sort of like a PMC. But basically the idea was it's like I don't know, like a highly professionalized version of a software powered troll farm. And then the theory was they had developed this like breakthrough way to basically do like mind control advertising through doing what's called Big Five personality profiling and psychometrics. And this sort of theory grew up that got kind of hyped up by the Guardian and kind of other newspapers that basically there was like this new form of basically advertising mind control that became a new form of political mind control. And then the theory goes that was deployed by, Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon. And then that led to an onslaught of, fake news and, all these, basically, like mind control ads that convince people to change their votes. With these psychometrics, and using stolen data from Facebook, and then that turned into Russiagate and the whole thing that followed. And before I knew it, I was sitting in an auditorium at Stanford after in 2017 after Hillary lost, 20 feet away from Hillary, and she said, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump is only president today because Vladimir Putin hacked Facebook. It sort of became that entire thing. It just like all of what followed from the kernel of truth thing was basically just fake. Cambridge Analytica, I think in retrospect, we now know was basically fake. It was basically a fundraising scam that was being run on Bob Mercer at the time. And that there have been various books now written about that go into more detail on that. It never really operated. The whole psychometric thing didn't work. Nobody today does advertising or political campaigning based on those methods. Like it never actually happened. It never worked. I said the Russians bought $150,000 worth of ads. Hillary spent $3 billion on her campaign in 2016, including, many hundreds of millions of dollars on Facebook. And so you just have to like really stretch these $150,000 worth of ads to believe that they somehow tilted the election.
They must have been really good ads.
Well, and that's the other thing. You can actually pull up the ads. If you actually pull up you can actually go online and you can find the ads now because there was so much attention on this. And if you look at the ads, I believe it will confirm that they were not in fact good ads.
Yeah.
And so it basically was, it was, and look, I'm not in favor of like Russia screwing around, but it was Russia screwing around. It wasn't this giant plot arc. By the way, which is why nobody even talks about it anymore, right? It's like, I think everybody at this point kind of knows the whole thing was what's the right word? Let's just say it was either enormously exaggerated or it was a hoax, depending on your politics.
Yeah. David, second question.
Oh, no, I mean, I want you to get some other two-way community here, but I would be interested to know, if one side is able to build a workforce with AI agents in the next few years when they get their data ready versus the other side, what type of impact that would have ultimately. But, maybe we can save that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Mark, just quickly, do you think if one party gets its act together, given how people think AI is going to revolutionize anything, would that be dispositive in politics or a major competitive advantage, or it doesn't lend itself to politics as much as other stuff?
Well, so it's kind of the full version of this theory basically is the idea that AI is going to get so smart and so good that it's going to be able to manipulate people into doing what it wants, right? And like if you have something that's just like super smart, it's going to be able to like mount every possible compelling argument to be able to convince you of anything. And my response to that is like, that's not how the world works today. Like I don't know about you, but like when I look around at the world today, I don't see the smart people telling the dumb people what to do and think and it working. Yeah. And in fact, like it's actually really funny. Like in business, you see this very clearly. Like the smart people aren't in charge, right? Like the PhDs work for the CEO, right? The PhDs have like 150 IQ, the CEO has like 120 IQ. Like it's not the smart person in charge. And then there's actually a great book on this, a great book in behavioral psychology called, I think it's called Not Born Yesterday. And it actually turns out, is anybody who's been in politics, political campaigning knows this, it's actually really hard to change people's minds, right? Like it's not that easy. And the reason, a presidential candidate spends $3 billion on a campaign is because they're trying desperately to get people to change their minds. And kind of by definition, one side always fails at that. And so like, it's actually quite hard. And so I think it's an enticing theory that somehow AI is going to be super persuasive. I think it's completely unproven. I'm probably a little bit more on the skeptical side. And again, that's less a judgment on the technology. It's more just a judgment on human nature, which is, I think most people kind of pride themselves on being themselves, and they're not so easy to trick.
Yep. Catherine, welcome in. Tell folks where you are and what's on your mind, please.
I am in Huntsville, Alabama, and I just want to echo what Mark H. said about just trying to find and listen to every Mark A. Interview for the past 2 months since the Joe Rogan interview. So I'm behind, and I may ask a question that you've already answered somewhere else. One other thing I want to do a shameless plug for, since Mark H. mentioned the revolution, is for Ron Paul. So Ron Paul's name hasn't come up a lot, but he was really the first guy who came up with the no tax on tips. And I think that he kind of maybe laid the groundwork for what we're seeing today with Trump, and it's very exciting. So my questions are related to Doge. And I just wanted to know, I guess I've heard that, and I don't know if this is true, if there's been sort of a split between Vivek and Elon. I don't know if Vivek maybe is just focusing on his gubernatorial campaign, if you knew anything about that. And then also, if Elon has his way with Doge, what is that going to look like? What is Doge actually going to do if Elon gets what he wants?
Great questions. And Catherine, don't worry, not even Mark's family could listen to all his podcast interviews. Like it's a full-time job. I don't know how he does anything but do them. So great questions, Mark.
Eventually
we'll get them all.
Yeah.
Mark, there's a kind of a personality question and then a substance question for you.
Yeah, so I don't really think so both Elon and Vivek are friends of mine. So and I think they're the whole, I think that's all kind of pretty well, kind of played out in the press or documented. So Vivek's off doing his new stuff. So I'll let them speak for themselves on that. But I like them both and respect them both and big fans of both of them. Yeah, look, Doge. I mean, look, the good news on the Doge is I just tell you, it's like Elon is one of those people. He's actually incredibly transparent. And it actually is funny to kind of read the press coverage around him, because there's lots of articles that are of the kind of like, what does Elon actually want, or what are his goals, or what is he doing, and what's his plan. And at least I found like generally him to be extremely transparent in the sense of the things that I hear from him in private are essentially identical to the things that he says in public. And so I think I would just basically take him at face value. He spoke at length, for example, on various stages in Pennsylvania, late last year, and talked about this in quite a bit of detail. And so I think he's, I think it's basically the stuff he's already said in public. I think he's obviously very serious about it. He sees a very big opportunity in his mind to really help the government improve and to do good for the taxpayers. And obviously he's off to the races.
I haven't seen.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I was just going to say I haven't seen what Elon has said as much as I did Vivek, because I was a big supporter of him and followed a lot and knew he had a lot of plans and had been working on a lot of these ideas with Brooke Rollins for years while Trump was not in office. So anyway, thank you for
Catherine, thank you for
allowing my question.
Thank you for coming, Catherine. Mark, what do you think? Again, you don't speak for the administration, I know. What do you think of dealing with Social Security during this term? If President Trump asks you, should he try to do the thing that everybody knows would save the system rather than destroying it? Would you recommend that as a good public policy thing for the country?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the president, I think, has been consistent that has no plan to do anything on entitlements. And so I'm going to, I will gently decline on that one.
All right. Let me ask you a question about Donald Trump, because you've spent some time with him and you're a keen observer. What is something you think you know about him that you think people get wrong or is little understood or little known?
Yeah, so look, a couple things. So one is, I would put him also, and I don't know if this is either going to sound incredibly obvious or incredibly crazy. I'm not sure which, but like I would put him in the same category with Elon. The at least my time with him, the private guy is the public guy. Like he says what he thinks. Like, and he may be the most transparent man in the world in the sense of like he says what he thinks, and you see that even playing out. You mentioned today. And so he actually just tends to get up there and says what he thinks. In private, he says basically the exact same things. Like I've not heard anything from him that's not something that he said in public. And so I think he's actually quite sort of transparent, and maybe, and I just say that just because I think we're all used to being habituated to, politicians who are not necessarily like that. And maybe one of the things that is shocking about him is the extent to which he just says what he's thinking. And people that can strike people as, kind of jarring in the moment or something, but like, on balance, I think that's probably a better way to do things. And so I think probably that's a net plus. And look, he's as like he is in his existence and his ongoing success is really, I think, causing a lot of professional politicians to really think hard about what is going to work in politics going forward. And I think part of it is like, are we just going to need a higher level of authenticity from our politicians? So like, does the plastic, the super well calibrated, kind of plastic speaking style and hedging on everything, does that actually work anymore? Like, if it doesn't get you elected, like, what's the point? And so maybe we're entering an era with a lot more authenticity.
Peter Thiel aside, a lot of you who have been supportive are relatively new to his world. Elon, after the shooting, most people in politics would say, why do we want a bunch of outsiders who are not long-term supporters of Donald Trump coming to Mar-a-Lago, being in Washington? So I see the same question, not just about Donald Trump, but about Susie Wiles and Stephen Miller. Why did they want people like you and Musk involved? People say that Trump wants trophies sitting in the front row of the inauguration to show that these people are bending down to him. From your conversations with him and from people around him, what's their motive for having people like you involved?
I think it's a couple of things. So one is like, look, as you know, like any winning campaign or any winning movement is a coalition. And so, presumably if you could build a coalition that includes more people, not fewer, that would be good. Some centrist Democrats have been making the kind of, opposite argument on their side, which is, wow, maybe the strategy we've had to drive these people out of the Democratic Party hasn't worked that well. And maybe we should recalibrate. I mean, Elon's a classic case. Like, Elon was a Democrat. Elon started Tesla because he wanted to solve climate change. He like tried really hard to be friends, to be friendly and be loyal, and he just got like repeatedly just like completely attacked and savaged over a long period of time. By the way, including politicians in the state of California, where his companies all used to be based. And so I think part of it is just the formation of coalitions. And obviously the coalitions are morphing and changing in real time. And then just the other thing that I just keep thinking about a lot is just like, the issue set, I think, has really changed. Like Trump himself changed the issue set a lot in 2015 and 2016. He greatly elevated the importance of issues like immigration and trade, which the Republican Party really did not want to engage on. There are, politicians on the left who did the same thing on, Bernie had a big impact. Elizabeth Warren's had a big impact. And then just the country's changed. Some issues that used to be hot issues have settled. I'll give you an example. Gay marriage. Gay marriage just as an issue just made Republicans absolutely persona non grata in the tech community for a very long time, with only very rare exception. And so the minute that became a settled issue with the Supreme Court case, all of a sudden that was no longer a barrier. Right. And then, so that's on the one, that's like an issue that's sort of going away just because it's just a settled issue. And then other issues have just become a lot more salient. And so I think I would put it this way. I think for a lot of us, I think a lot of things came into focus over the last 2 or 3 years that maybe were fuzzier or harder to figure out, where all of a sudden it was just like, okay, there's, to your question, there are actually a shared set of goals. When we talk to Trump, it's like, it's like, Mr. President, like, what do you want? Like, how are you thinking about all this? And he's like, look, it's like, I just want America to win. And he said, you guys in tech is one of the crown jewels of the American economy. Like, I want you guys to win. I want you guys to succeed globally. I want America to win globally. You guys are a key part of business. I want American business to win globally. He said, I don't understand why you guys all support politicians who clearly hate you. Like, what is that? And then he said, he said, look, and he said, it's like a real shame that you guys all polarize so hard against me, because like all I ever wanted was for you guys to win. And then he told us a bunch of stories about, interactions that he'd had with tech business leaders, including very positive ones where he felt like he was helping them, kind of succeed on the world stage.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, like that's an easy, there's, many other issues involved in the coalition, but like that's an easy thing to come together on.
Yep.
Like I said, I would love to see Democrats also have that attitude. I think it makes
Yeah.
total sense. They just haven't for a while, and I hope they come back to it.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see if presidential candidates in 28 do that. Before we end up, I'm very honored, flattered to have you, delighted to have you as someone who watches us. I just love your insights into what you think is different about two-way from other media.
Yeah, so I mean, look, it's just, I mean, look, part of it's you, and then part of it is you somehow, I don't know how you did it, but you somehow found a Republican and a Democrat who can sit in the same virtual room for days and weeks on end and actually like talk and not get like furious at each other.
Yes. They've come to
and
like each other more over time rather than less.
which is amazing, right? And so that's really remarkable. And at least I find them both to be very fair-minded, and generally very, they're willing, they're willing to kind of, call it as they see it. And they don't feel like they just have to reflect tribal loyalties, and so it feels like an oasis of, an oasis of actual discussion. I mean, I'm going to flatter myself here for a moment. Like, my day job is trying to evaluate these startups and trying to figure out which ones are going to succeed, and it doesn't do me any good in my day job to lie to myself, right, or convince myself that like, it's just like I have to actually get to the truth to actually know what's going on. And at least I'll flatter myself by saying I think that's what I'm trying to do when I like read the news. And it's just like, boy, it is, as you alluded to earlier, it's become harder and harder to find places where it's not just a full-on one-way blast, every day. And you've created an oasis.
Thank you for that. We're very grateful to you for making the hour. We didn't take 3 hours like Rogan, so you owe us 2 more, but we'll space them out over time so you don't get winded. Very grateful to you. And I say again, with honesty, if you haven't listened to Mark's other interviews on a range of topics, I recommend him to you because he just has an understanding of some of the big trends. And particularly, I didn't bring it up because you've talked at length about it, but your understanding of what young people have done, not just to workplaces where you work, but workplaces around the country and our universities. It's one of the most profound stories of the last 50 years, I think, truly. And your understanding of it and the way you explain it is just fantastic. And although it's horrifying what's happened, it's a little bit comforting to have your keen explanation of it. So thank you for that. Thank you for making time, and you're welcome back anytime you want to be with us.
Good.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'm sorry, live event, Sunday. Live event, going to stream. So we'll see some of you in person on Sunday, but the rest of you can watch it stream live, 5 p.m. Eastern time, live from Washington, D.C. Sean and Dan and I. And then Monday morning, 9 a.m. And then Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, David Burrell and I with our special look in the diner on Should We Buy Greenland? It'll be a conversation like no other. I urge you to come and ask questions because we've got a great poll which we distributed a little bit earlier today. So see you Sunday and then 3 times on Monday, 9, 2, and 6 Eastern. Have a great week, good evening, great week evening, and a great weekend. And we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks, everybody.